Music theory using Microsoft Excel. Chords named by mode and modal half step, this time building chords from the Dorian mode. Get ready and some coffee, cause you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin'. And that's what we do it with Microsoft Excel though. That's what helps us excel. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just continue constructing from this point going forward. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below. Fretboard, example, practice blank. The fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard that we will refer back to. The example tab having the finished product, in essence, the answer key. The practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we're working in the blank tab where we started from a blank worksheet and we'll be continuing on the blank part of the worksheet this time, practicing our Excel skills as well as our music skills as we go, noting that in reality, those things are one and the same because Excel is the best guitar and music theory software ever invented. All right. Let's go on over to the fretboard to get an idea of what we will be doing. We're going to be building chords, this time on the Dorian mode. Now, you might be saying, hey, look, that's kind of weird. I don't know what that means because the chord system typically isn't based on the Dorian mode because it's basically based off of the major scale. So let's say what the general story is and why this might be a useful thing to do, an easier type of thing to do, particularly for the guitar when you're trying to map everything out on the fretboard. Remembering, the guitar is a map of our territory. It has, in essence, 7 destination continents on it. If we compare it to the globe, there are 12 places, but the non-destination continents are like the oceans. We drive through them to get to the destination continents. If we take our perspective from space, looking at the planet of the fretboard, shifting around, we can imagine that there's 12 different vantage points that we look at the fretboard from, naming those with the note names. The note names then gives us the collection of notes. The 12 notes will tell us where the continents are in relation to our perspective from space. Once we get into the continents, though, we're no longer going to name them by the note name because that's not the most efficient thing to do. The most efficient thing to do is to name them by the absolute continent name, which in our case, we're going to say is the modes or the mode numbers. So Ionian, Phrygian, Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. That works great, but we see that there are some problems that come up with the naming convention that was created over time with regards to the distance terminology, which is going to be the intervals, and with regards to the chord terminology, because the chords are going to be based on the major scale and the minor scale, and when we discuss what notes are in the chord, we tend to use the note names or the relative scale degree positions, which are both inefficient and misleading. So again, I guarantee you that anybody that you know playing guitar will be confused if they're somewhat new of a player, even experienced player. They're gonna, when they move from say the 1-4-5 of a chord progression, what does that actually mean? Are they going from a major scale position to a major scale position to a major, kind of, in that the shape of the chords remain the same, but you're not actually shifting the shape up. You're still playing within the same shape. So I don't want to change the map of the territory every time I switch a chord is the general idea. So when you say you're playing a 1-4-5, you can remember that there's a major shape if you just play a triad, but it would be better to remember that you are playing the actual mode number, absolute mode number of 1-4-5, which all have different shapes if you extend them beyond just a triad. And so you can name that by saying you're basically playing an Ionian mode, a Lydian mode, and a Mixolydian mode. You can see that because the shape is different. That also is extremely helpful on a guitar in particular because you're trying to memorize these different shapes and how you can finger around the guitar as you're playing things. So the shape is different if you're in the Ionian, and then you name it differently for the Lydian, and then the Mixolydian. It tells you where you are on the guitar. So it's way better. Why don't we do that? Because the naming system was based on the major key. And then they kind of crammed in the modes later. The jazz guys and the blues guys came in and cleaned things up, cleaned the system up a bit by making chord names for the like the Mixolydian and whatnot, which had been ignored for a long time. But to do that, they had to cram things in there. So it would be better if we could rename the system based just on the modes. That would be the easy thing to do. So if I go to the Dorian mode, which we're doing now, we could just say we're just playing a Dorian chord. And you might say, well, that's harder because you should call it a minor chord, because if you say it's a Dorian chord, there's 3 different Dorian modes. So now you've just increased the number of minor chords. But it shouldn't be harder because I already know the 2. The 2 creates a minor triad, you can think of it. And if I say the 2 is the Dorian mode, then that naturally leads me into being able to extend my understanding. You see, if I call something a Dorian, if I call this Dorian a minor chord, that works for the triad, but I don't really understand what's happening. I don't really understand how it fits in the overarching shape. And if I want to extend the chord beyond the triad, I'm not going to know if I could do that or not, because I don't know if the other notes that I can add are appropriate, are the same as the minor key. There's going to be one that's going to be different for each of them. All right, so that said, let's go to the example. We did this for the Ionian last time. It was kind of a long worksheet. We might have to clean this up a bit. But now we're going to go to the Dorian, which is the first one that's a little bit more confusing, because remember, it's the major and the minor that all the names were built off of. So and really what's happening is the system we're currently using is more confusing than just saying that you're in the Dorian. Now, as I say that, I do want to point out that there is a limitation here. What is that limitation? You're going to need to know all of the notes from the perspective of the Dorian. And possibly it would be great to know the intervals or the modal half steps in relation to it. And a lot of people will say, well, that's harder because I don't know that. I only know the major key intervals, and so that's why it makes sense to base everything off the major. But I don't believe that's true, because you do know at least that the 2 is a minor chord. So you know the 1, 3, 5. That's what basically everybody knows anyways. So now we're just going to say that's the baseline of the Dorian. I'm just not going to call it a minor. I'm going to call it the 2 chord, which everybody knows, which you could just apply the Latin name to it, or the Greek name, Dorian. It's a Dorian chord. It's a 3-note Dorian chord. That's all, and that's all you need. You know, that gives you a lot more detail. All right, so let's go to the blank tab and keep building this out. So we built out up top for the major. Now we're on the Dorian. So we have the 7 modes. So now we're just going to build out on the Dorian. Now, just a quick note as well. You might be saying, what if there's a chord that has a note that's not in the key? Meaning we're building all of our chords off of the 7 notes in whatever key we're in. So what if, or the collection of notes, what if there's a note in a chord that's not in that key? Well, then we could add it. We'll talk more about that later. And that's confusing often for both whatever naming convention we have. But usually the chords that you're going to be building are built off of notes that are in the collection of notes, right? So the easiest way to build the chord is just to say this is the node that we're on, in this case the Dorian, node number 2, mode number 2, and we're going to build a chord off it. And all you have to then say is, how many notes am I going to include, right? I don't need to name it by the scale degree. It's the 7th or whatever. It would be easier to name it by just saying, hey, there's 3 notes in it. And I know what 3 notes they are, because it's going to be the one we are on, the 2, right, in our case, and then the Lydian, the Dorian, the Lydian, and the Aeolian, because you skip every other one. So all we need to do is just say here's the mode that we're in, here's how many notes that we're going to be playing, a triad, 3 notes, right? So let's see what that would look like. So we're in the Dorian, and this is going to be our abbreviation. So we could call it the normal name would be a D minor. So there's the D minor. That's what traditionally it has been called. Now, what's the problem with D minor? there's no difference between the D minor and the Aeolian, as well as the Phrygian. These are the minor modes. So you might say, well, that's a benefit because now they're all the same. But it's not a benefit because you don't, it doesn't tell you where you are in the song progression, and it's just as easy to call it the 2 chord, which you already know has a minor triad that looks the same. But if you call it a Dorian, that allows you to build on it. So I would say that it would be better to call it something like, we're going to call it a D2. So that the small d is going to stand for a Dorian, and then it's a D, happens to be the D note. And then it's 2. Why do I put a 2 instead of a 3? Because I would like to say that the D is the node we are on, plus 2 modal whole steps, meaning we're on the Dorian mode, and then 1 modal whole step, which would be 2 half steps, a Lydian, and another modal whole step would be here. So we're on the Dorian, Lydian, Aeolian. That's how we build it, which you could say is a DFA. Notice it's a lot better to say that it's the Dorian, Lydian, and Aeolian, because if we were on any other mode, that would still work, whereas the notes do not, right? So why wouldn't you do it the way that works more places? So then we could call it a DD2 if it was the tonic. We might call it a DD2 for the tonic. All right, so let's say we do the modal half steps. So this time we're going to say it's a Dorian mode, and if we count it by modal half steps, once again we would say it's the Dorian, and we have 2 modal half steps to here, and then 4 modal half steps to here, or 2 and then another 2. So I'm going to say, all right, it's what we usually do when we build it. We're going to say it's 0, 2, 4. That would be the right way to do it if we weren't measuring weird with scale degrees, but we are measuring weird oftentimes with scale degrees if we're trying to convert it to what we currently think about, which means we're going to start on the relative position if it was a scale degree, which would be 1, and then we're going to say 1 plus 2 and 1 plus 4. So I would like to think of it as I start on the node that we're on, which is node number 2, and then I go up to 2 modal half steps, which is a whole step, and then I go up another 2 or 4 from 0 modal half steps, which would get me to off by 1 for the scale degrees because they messed it up. So that's going to be a 1, 3, 5 is the chord. All right, let's make that blue. Up top, make it blue. And all right, and then we're going to say, okay, the nodes then, if we look at the nodes, we're starting this time on the 2. So the absolute node number 2. And then we're going to go up. It's going to go from 2 plus 2, gets us to a 4. And from the starting point of 2 plus 4 gets us to the 6. So if we convert that, what's that going to be? Let's redo the formula just so you can see it. This is going to be equals x lookup. And we're going to find that 2, comma, in this selection of notes, comma, and then you can see the formula up here, comma, return to me this abbreviation here. Okay, boom. So that's the Dorian. Let's go back in it. I'm going to make absolute here, F4 on the keyboard, $ before the letter and the number, absolute here. F4 on the keyboard, F4 on the keyboard. So these are all absolute except for this first one so that I can copy it over. I'm going to copy that Dorian, put it here, Lydian, and then Aeolian. So if we name the actual mode points, the continents that we're adding continent number 2, Dorian, continent number 4, Lydian, continent number 6, Aeolian with our continent analogy, right? So then, all right, well then, yeah, I know it's kind of weird. We're fingering 3 continents at the same time. It's like we're God or something. I don't know, how do you finger 3 continents? I don't know. But those are the 3 continents that we're putting our fingers on the fretboard. So now, according to our analogy. So now let's say we add another one. Normally we would call this a D minor 7, a D minor 7. So what does that mean? So that means if I skip every other note from the D, that's going to be the Dorian, the Lydian, the Aeolian, and then now we're going to be adding the Ionian. Now, why is the Dorian a minor? because the third here is only 3 notes away. So remember, these are the 7 notes that we've counted, but in actual half steps then, if I was going from the C to the third, from a scale degree standpoint, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4 notes away. But if I start on the D and I skip a note 1, 2, 3, it's only 3 notes away. So when we get to scale, when we get to our intervals, we'll see that that's going to be a major third versus a minor third. Right now, I just want to intuitively note that if I just list these in order, we just take every other note to build our chords. And this one's going to be like the 7. Why is it named a minor 7? Because this is the 7 from a scale degree. So this would be the 1, 3, 5, and then the 7, right? So, but let's go back on over here. And so we're going to say, what would be an easier way to name it? If we know that we're in the Dorian mode and we add the 7, I don't need to say the scale degree that it's the 7, right? All I need to do, because we know how the thing is built, all I need to do is say this is going to be a D3 chord, meaning it's a Dorian chord with 4 notes. Why do I put a 3? Because I'm saying it's the tonic plus 3 modal whole steps. So 3 notes plus the root, because the 3 is the distance plus the root. So that's all you really need. It's a 4-note D Dorian chord. And then how do you build that? You just take every other note. So I don't need to name the scale degree that it's the 7, because it's the same assumption, right? They're naming the scale degree, but you don't really need to do that. All you need to say is, look, there's 4 notes, and we know that we're in the Dorian mode. So if you use modes, it's way easier. All you have to do is look, we're doing the Dorian mode. It's going to have 4 notes in it. So just take every other note, every other whole step for 4 notes, right? For starting at note 0. And so, and if it was here, we could say this would be a DD3. This would be DD3. Okay. So then we're going to say, once again, it's a Dorian. And then I'm going to say, what notes do we include? Well, we go 0, the node we're on, plus 2, plus 0 plus 4, and 0 plus 6, right? So, or up to. That's how we're going to count it out. All right, well then what would be the scale degree? Well, the scale degree is going to be equal to then, let's say this is the Dorian again, and this is going to be the same as we had over here. For the scale degree, it's going to be, we'll just say 1, and it's going to be equal 1 plus the 2 gets us to the 3. These are off by 1, right? 1 plus the 4, and then 1 plus the 6. So I would like to say, from a distance standpoint, it's the even numbers, right? It's the 0, 2, 4, 6, which is off by 1, or the scale degrees are actually off by 1 with their less efficient naming convention, where they got it wrong and they started on 1 instead of 0 like we normally would for its proper coding, and so it's off by 1. So you build it with a scale degree of 1, 3, 5, 7. That's why it's called the 7, because they're naming the last scale degree. But it would be easier just to say, hey, it's a 4-note chord. Just count it out yourself, right? Just take every other note from the scale we're in, because we know we're in the Dorian, and we don't have to do anything weird to say that we're in the Dorian, because by thinking that we're in the major key, right? Because if that's the problem, right? When you just base everything on the major, you have to distinguish when you're going to deviate from the major key or not. If you just say, well, look, hey, we're in the Dorian key, then it's easy. You just have to say, well, it's a 4-note chord. Just take every other note in the key, right? And so then I'm going to say, okay, so the modes that we have is going to be the 2. It's going to be the 2 is where we start on. What are going to be how are we going to name the points? Let's just copy this over here. It's going to be the Dorian, and then it's going to be the 2 plus 2, and then it's going to be the 2 plus 4, and then it's going to be the 2 plus 6. All right, so we're going to copy the Dorian, and then Lydian, Aeolian, and then this one's going to be, wait, that's an 8. Hold on, you can't have an 8. So we have to say 8 minus 7 brings us down to the Ionian. Okay, So that's good. That's what we've got there. So that makes sense, I think. All right. So now we're going to go to a 4-note chord. Let me adjust my worksheet up here. I got to get to work. I got a lot of work to do. Apparently, I'm feeding the entire apartment complex I live in is dependent on me putting food on the table, apparently. So I've got to, so we have to crank this out, people. This is going to be a D minor 9. D minor 9. So what does that mean? Well, if I go back on over here, this is the normal naming convention, is going to be the Dorian, and then the Lydian. We skip every other note, the Aeolian, the Ionian, and then the Phrygian. Now, okay, why is it a 9? Because if I look at a scale degree, it would be 1, 3, 5, 7. But then we'd have to go back around the circle to the 2, right? Which would be here from the standpoint of the Dorian. But they don't want to do that because the 2 would be lower, and then that would make it seem like maybe that we wouldn't have to add these other notes in there. So they want to keep going up to the 9. So the 9 is kind of like it's equivalent to the 2. That's how it's basically working out. Now, it would be a lot easier if we just say, hey, why don't we just recognize that we're in the Dorian and just call it a DD4, meaning it's a 5-note chord. It's got 4 modal whole steps plus the root. So it's a 5-note Dorian, it's a 5-note D Dorian chord. And all you have to do is count every other note. I don't need to worry about, like, is the 9 a major 9 or a minor 9, or is it like what is it compared to the major or minor key, because we're just building a chord off of the Dorian scale degree. So just take every other note within it. And you might say, well, what happens if I go around the circle? Well, that's the convention. I don't need to keep going up. The convention is that you take every other note, and then once you go around the circle, you just take the next note. So it's okay that you're going to go around the circle and pick up the 2, right? Which would be the 1 in our case, right? If it was a modal half step. You just note that that's what you do. You just go around the circle. I don't need to go, oh, I have to keep on going upwards, right? And why don't I have to do that? Because I didn't name this like a 9 or an 8 based on the scale degrees, and now I don't want to put a lower number, right? I didn't want to put a 1 here because then it would look like I'm not going to go up. The 9 needs to be higher than the 7 is why they did this. Then if it was a 2, the 2 would be lower than the 7, and people would get confused that you wouldn't know that you have to add up to all the notes before that point. But you don't need to do that if you just say, hey, just pick every other note and then go around the circle because we're in this key. See how much cleaner that is to do. Okay, so then this would be a DD4 if it was the tonic, and then we're going to say this is going to be the Dorian, and we're just going to say, okay, just take the Dorian, whatever that note is, and then go up 2 modal half steps, and then 4 modal half steps from that note, 6 modal half steps, and 8 modal half steps, or just 2, 2, 2, 2, and then just pick them all and go around this. You'll go around the horn on this last one, and that's okay. So then if we're on a scale degree standpoint, it would be the scale degrees for the Dorian would start on the 1, and then it would be, if we make that the 1, we'd say it'd be the 1 plus 2. So now we have instead of the 2, it would be the third, 1 plus 3, or 1 plus 4, and then 1 plus 6, and then 1 plus 8. Boom. Now notice these scale degrees. Now I have a 9 here, right? So the 9 is going to be, you could also say it's in essence the 2, right? Because there's only 7 notes in the scale. Okay, and then we're also going to say then that this is going to be, from a modal standpoint, we're going to start on the 2. We start on the 2. Let's put this one in, and let's just copy this over. So from a nodal standpoint, this would be the best way to name the chord. You're going to start on the Dorian, and then you're going from node number 2 plus 2 up, which would take you to 4. And then you're going to start on the 2, and then you're going to go up by 4, get you to the 6. And then you're going to start on the 2, and you're going to go up by 6 to get you to 8. Or you can just take 2, 4, 6, 8. but we'll just keep going this way, and we're going to say that we're going to start on the 2, and then we go up by 8, and then I'm going to subtract. Notice I can't go up past 7, so I got to bring this back down. So let's say we'll double click in here, -7, and then this is going to be -7. All right. So then what's that going to be? That means we're on the Dorian, and then we go to the Lydian, and then we go to the Aeolian, and then we go to the Ionian, because it goes around the horn, 7. I mean, it goes from the 6, 7, and then round to 1, and then the Phrygian. All right, let's do the next one. So now we have a 6-note chord. So what would a 6-note chord normally be called in the crazy system that we're currently using? It would be a, hold on. I lost my mouse there for a second. All right, we're going to say it's going to be in the crazy system, this is going to be a D minor 11. D minor 11. What does that mean? Well, if I went over here, we'd say, okay, that means we're basically starting on the D. What I'd like to do is take the Dorian, skip to the Lydian, skip to the Aeolian, skip to the Ionian, and then skip to the Phrygian, and then I think one more to the Mixolydian. And from a scale degree standpoint, this would be the 1, 3, 5, 7, and then it goes to 9, even though there's only 7 scale degrees, and then the 11. So the 11 would be equivalent to the 4. But it would be easier if we just recognize that we're in Dorian. We don't have to use the scale degrees. We can just say, hey, look, we're going to be in a DD5, meaning it's going to start on the D note. It's going to be a Dorian chord, and we're going to have the root plus 5. In other words, a 6-note chord, 5 modal whole steps. So we're on the mode that we're on, mode number 2. You're going to take every other mode, and which will be 5 modal whole steps, and that's so we could just call it basically a Dorian D5, right? Which would be a Dorian D 6-note chord, and that's all. And that is right, and that's all you really need. And then we're going to say, if it was the tonic, we could make it a capital, the DD5, and then we can say the modal half steps are going to be. For the Dorian, it would be 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 10. So then from a scale degree standpoint, we would be on the Dorian, and this would be equal to the 1. Let's say we start on 1 all the time because we're going to rename it, which is silly, but that's what they do. So 1 plus 2 would be the 3rd, 1 plus 4 would be 5, 1 plus the 6 would be 7, 1 plus 8 would be 9, and hold on a second, I feel like we're missing one here, aren't we? Shouldn't this go out to, yeah, I messed up here on the Ionian, so sorry about that. Let me see if I can insert, and this should be 7, this should be the 5, so this is going to be 1 plus 4 would give us the 5. Let's pull these back over here, and then this is going to be equal to the 1 plus 10 gives us the 11. So we've got the 1, 3, 5, and then 7, and then the 9 is equivalent to the 2, the 11 is equivalent to the 4. All right, last one, last round. This is how many notes that we can pack in there is a 7-note chord. Oh wait, we're not quite done yet. I'm going to say this is the Dorian. You're not done yet, man. You're not done yet. This is going to be the Dorian. Let's just call it the 1. Or it's the 2 now. We're on the 2. You got to put food on the table. On my table? No, on the whole apartment complex's table. You need to put food on every table in the apartment okay, I'm trying, man. All right, cut me some slack. Everyone's gonna starve if you don't get to work. Okay, I'm going, man. It's gonna start. Alright, this is gonna be 10. Hold on, I messed up. Let me do this again. This is gonna be 2 plus 8. Apologize. This is gonna be equal to, on the Ionian, we're gonna say, okay, we started on the mode of, let's just say, the 1, and then it's gonna be equal to 1 plus 2, and then it would be 1 plus 4, and then it would be 1 plus 6, and then it would be 1 plus 8, and then it would be 1 plus 10. All right, okay, so let's copy that, and then I can copy this formula and paste it here. So that would be the Ionian. That makes sense. Okay, Ionian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. All right, I went dyslexic before, and this needs to be brought down. -7, -7. I got it backwards. That's what I meant by that. Got it backwards. That's okay. We'll keep going. Keep going. And then this is going to be equal to the 2. Okay, and then this is going to be equal to the 2 plus 2, and this will be 2 plus 4, and this will be 2 plus 6, and this will be 2 plus 8, and this will be 2 plus 10. Okay, and then I got to bring these down. I'm going to double click here, -7. Double click here, oh no, undo, Control Z, -7, double click here, -7, and then I can copy these. I can copy this. Get your head in the game. Get your head in the game. Gotta put food on the table. Gotta put food on the tables, plural, tables. Tables. All right, let's try let's do one more. Okay. Let's say we had a 7-note chord. So we're gonna call, the normal name would be a D minor 13. So why is it a D minor 13? Because if we go back on over here, we'd be taking from the D, skipping to the Lydian, skipping to the Aeolian, skipping to the Ionian, to the Phrygian, to the Mixolydian, and finally to the Locrian. That would be the 1, 3, 5, 7, and then 7, 9, 11, and 13. So the 9, 11, 13 are equivalent to the 2, 4, and 6. So, but it'd be a lot easier if we just said, okay, why don't we just say that we're in the key of the Dorian? Why don't we just make this easy? It's not a C minor, it's a D minor. We're on the D. And let's just call this a D 6. So that means it's a 7-note chord. I'm gonna make this green. It's a 7-note chord because it's 6 modal half steps up from the node we're starting on, which is the Dorian, which happens to be the D in this case. So that would be a lot easier if we just recognize the modes, the naming convention would naturally follow and be easier to do. Now you might be, well, we'll get into that later. So we're gonna say, okay, what are the modal half steps are gonna be? Let's say we start on the Dorian. This is gonna be equal to, let's say, the Dorian. And then we've got a 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Scale degrees then would be the Dorian. It would start on the 1, and then we'd say this is going to be 1 plus 2 would be the 3, 1 plus 4, 1 plus 6, 1 plus 8, 1 plus 10, 1 plus 12. All right, and then we're gonna say, all right, the modes, if we list all of the modes in order, then we're starting on mode number 2. And we're gonna say, okay, if we're starting on mode number 2, we just say it's gonna be 2 plus 2. It will give us the mode number 4, 2 plus 4, and then 2 plus 6, and then 2 plus 8, and then 2 plus 10, and then 2 plus 12. All right, and then I'm just gonna bring these down, double click, minus 7. Double click, minus 7. And then by the way, we could use formulas to copy and paste a little bit more cleanly, which maybe we'll look at later, just for our Excel practice purposes. But for right now, it might be easier to do it kind of manually so we can actually see what's happening. So this is going to be the Dorian to the Phrygian to the Aeolian to the, wait a sec, Dorian to the Lydian to the Phrygian to the, okay, now I got 2 Phrygians. So 2, 4, 6. What happened here? 6 should be, so I went up 2, 4, 6. Okay, now what happened? This is plus the 4, and this should be plus the 6. Right, that's right. Plus the 6. And then minus 7. So Dorian, Lydian, Aeolian, Ionian, Phrygian. I think that's right. I'm getting tired. Mixolydian, Locrian. We should have everything. 2, 4, 6, and then 1, 3, 5, and 7. I think that's right. Okay, I think we have it. So that's going to be the general idea. Like I said, we don't often have a chord with all the notes in it. So we're usually using triads, but we can build out at least to the 7, and we'd like to be able to add, the upper ones as well and play with those. So that's going to be the general idea. Next time, we'll continue on, and we'll do the Phrygian.